Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is the 11th episode of the summary of the Quran. We are beginning the third group of surahs from tonight. I have mentioned at the beginning of this presentation of summary that the Quran has been divided into 7 surah groups, such that each group begins with one or more Meccan surahs and ends with one or more Madanan surahs. Each group has its own theme, each group has its own arrangement of surahs which all support and effectively describe the theme in a certain logical sequence. This particular group of surahs is comprised of 15 surahs, 14 of which are Meccan. They were revealed before the migration to Medina in the first 13 years of the prophetic mission. And there's only one surah, Surah An-Nur, which is a Madanan surah. In this surah, what we find is that the people of Mecca, the Quraysh, the leadership in particular, is being warned against the dire consequences of their wrong attitude. There is good news given to the believers of ultimate victory and dominance of this message against the enemies. And also, these surahs mention instructions to the believers for them to be purified, cleansed, and be required to go through spiritual and moral excellence, the process of it. The Quraysh are directly addressed in this group. Jews and Christians are talked of indirectly. They had started appearing in the background to support Quraysh so that they could somehow silence or eliminate this emerging threat that was there to their so-called religious supremacy. So they were also beginning to play a role. And the Prophet, may God mercy be on him, and believers are addressed too. Probably it would be the right time for me to remind again that when we read the Quran, we would do well to find out when we are reading a certain surah as to which part of the prophetic mission does it belong to. The Quranic surahs, all of them, belong to one of the 6 phases of prophetic mission. It started from the phase of Inzar, warning, followed by Inzar-e-Am, warning to everyone, general, universal warning. That period was followed by the period of Itmam-e-Hujjah, that is, the evidence of the undeniable truth was established, and it was declared that the truth is now manifest, followed by the declaration of disassociation from the disbelievers and the announcement of migration to Medina. These are the phases in the Meccan stage of the Quranic revelation. In the Madanan stage, there are 2 further stages in the Madanan phase. One is the phase of cleansing, purification, and moral and spiritual excellence for Muslims, and they are being guided and directed to follow a certain path and the instructions for them to reach that goal. And finally, there are verses and surahs which are talking about the punishment to be meted out to the disbelievers. These surahs, the first two surahs, Yunus and Hud, the 10th and 11th surahs of the Quran, which form a pair, they belong to the third phase, that is the phase where an undeniable evidence is established for the truthfulness of the message. So let's start with Surah Yunus first. It starts with Alif Lam Ra, which are the letters, disjointed letters, which also begin Surah Hud as well, which is one indication of the fact that the two surahs are forming a pair. The Almighty says, Akana linnasi ajaban. Has it come as a surprise for people? An awhayna, the fact that we have revealed ila rajulim minhum, to a messenger, to a prophet from amongst them, who has come to warn them, warn people of dire consequences if they reject the message. And he has come to give good news to the believers that there is a position of great respect for them before their Lord. So, is it surprising for these people of Mecca and those who are not believing it, instead of accepting this reality, which was the logical response, realistic, rational response, they declare that it's a clear magic. It is affecting us. It's impressive, but it's impressive in the sense, in the category of magic. If it is influencing some people, it's just simply because of the magical touch that it has in it. It's not genuine. That's what they were trying to say to their people. The Almighty is saying that these people are not accepting this message because they're so deeply involved in their worldly matters, and they're obsessed with a love for worldly gains, that they're not interested in knowing the truth. So God Almighty says, Inna allazina la yarjuna liqa'ana wa radu bil hayatid dunya. Those people who do not look forward to meet us and are content with this life alone and are fully satisfied with it, those who are heedless, those are the ones who are heedless to our signs. They are the ones whose abode shall be the hell because of their evil deeds. In other words, human beings have been given this ability to know the truth, to acknowledge it, to support it. That's what comes naturally to all humans. That's what is the rational approach. However, there are obstacles, impediments. The biggest obstacle is this worldly life. It's glamorous, it's attractive. It attracts our attention towards itself and somehow makes it difficult for us to focus on the truth about this life, the realities that are convincing, and yet people are involved in their immediate distractions of life so deeply that they start rejecting and denying the truth. So that's what the Almighty is accusing these disbelievers of. The Quran tells us in verse 15, وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُنَا بَيِّنَاتٍ. When our clear signs, verses are recited to them, those who don't look forward to meeting us say, these disbelievers, the polytheists of Makkah, the leaders of Quraysh, they say, bring us a Quran other than this one or alter it. ائْتِ بِقُرْآنٍ غَيْرِ هَذَا وَبَدِّلْهُ. Say to them, O Prophet, tell them, it is not for me to change it of my own accord. I only follow that is what is revealed to me. If I were to disobey my Lord, I fear the punishment of a fearful day. That is, how can I change the Quran on my own? It's from God. But the people of Mecca, the Quraysh, the leaders in particular, they didn't want the Quran to be accepted because even though it was convincing, it was making a lot of sense, it was requiring them to change their religious ways. It was ultimately threatening them to change the kind of luxurious living they were having. Their leadership was getting threatened, and they deep inside, they didn't want that to happen. So they said, if you want us to get inclined towards this book, it is impressive in some ways, but change it. We want a few amendments to be introduced to the book, or bring a different book. This one is not acceptable. It's too inflexible, it's too strict, and is criticizing our religion, religious traditions, our gods too strongly. So the Almighty asked the Prophet to tell them that that's not possible. It's not my book. I have not come up with my own religious ideas. It's from God, and I too am bound to follow it. The personality of the Prophet was presented by the Quran in this verse for people to know, to see for themselves that this book and this message is from God. So in verse 16, the Almighty says, قُلْ لَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَا تَلَوْتُهُ عَلَيْكُمْ. If God had willed, I would not have recited this Quran to you. وَلَا أَدْرَاكُمْ بِهِ. Nor would God have informed you about it. It was God's decision. It's His planning that's going on. فَقَدْ لَبِثْتُ فِيكُمْ عُمُرًا مِّن قَبْلِهِ. And I have lived with you for a lifetime before it was revealed. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Then do you not ponder? Do you not reflect? Did you ever see me saying anything similar to what I'm saying now? I've lived for 40 years with you. I've shown you to be a man who was of the highest moral dispensation. I was declared by you as as-sadiq, the truthful, al-amin, the trustworthy, as morally upright. But I was never interested in the kind of stuff that I am presenting to you now in the name of God. Had that been the case, you probably would have had a right to claim that what I'm saying is my own concoction. I've invented all this myself. But the fact that I've lived for you for such a long time, and as a person who's very reliable, but on the other hand, I was never ever found interested in either literary activities or matters that had to do with theology. Never ever. So how can you come up with the claim that this is my own doing? Then the Quran, a few verses later, in verses 57 and 58 says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, qad ja'atkum maw'izatum min rabbikum. There has come to you an exhortation from your Lord, وَالشِّفَاءُ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, and healing for what is in the hearts, and a guidance and mercy for the believers. وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Tell them, it has come through the bounty and mercy of God. Let them rejoice on its arrival. It is better than what they are accumulating. That is, this book has come to enable us to cleanse our inner weaknesses, the inner ailments. That's what it means when it says it's shifa'ul lima fi sudur. Hearts carry ailments. Ailment of obsessive love for this worldly life, ailment of hatred, ailment of jealousy, ailment of hypocrisy, etc. So this book has come to purify me, to enable me to get rid of these contaminations. So whoever is able to understand it, this message, it's a guidance for him, and it's going to be a mercy in the next life. This guidance is going to lead the individual on the way to the right path and would eventually enable the individual to be successful in the next life, where God's mercy is going to overwhelm such people. So rejoice, celebrate the fact that the book has come to you. The Quran then goes on to describe the stories of Noah, Nuh alayhi salam, and Moses, Musa alayhi salam. This latter story of Musa alayhi salam, towards the end, when the Almighty tells us that Pharaoh and his followers were subjected to punishment, as has always been the case when a messenger of God comes. When Pharaoh was about to be drowned, the Almighty says, he addressed him directly and told him, فَالْيَوْمَ نُنَجِّيكَ بِبَدَنِكَ. Today I am going to save your body. That is, you're going to be killed, but your body is going to remain intact. لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً, so that you should become, for people to come later, a sign. وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ النَّاسِ عَنْ آيَاتِنَا لَغَافِلُونَ. And there are many people who, despite seeing our clear signs, they still remain heedless. They don't take seriously. This verse was revealed 1400 plus years ago. It has never ever been altered from the day it was revealed, because it was memorized and the entire Quran is fully preserved. But it's only maybe a couple of centuries ago, or even less, that the body of Pharaoh was discovered, mummified, and it can be found. The body of Ramesses II is preserved and currently on display in the museum and the Royal Mummies Chamber in the Grand Egyptian Museum, Cairo. So the Almighty promised that this fellow, the enemy of God and his messenger, his body is not going to be allowed to be destroyed the way most bodies disintegrate and disappear. And this promise has remarkably come true. Towards the end, the Almighty says in verses 99 and 100, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا. Had it been God's will, your Lord's will, all those who are living on the face of this earth would have believed. أَفَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسَ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. But God has given them freedom, and people choose to do good and believe, and they choose to do wrong and disbelieve. So are you going to force people until such time that they believe? So Prophet, don't worry about him. Do your job and leave the rest to me. I am putting people to test. Verse 100 of this surah, surah number 10, is an important verse. It says, وَمَا كَانَ لِنَفْسٍ أَن تُؤْمِنَ. There is no possibility for any individual human to believe إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, except by the will of God, by His leave. وَيَجْعَلُ الرِّجْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. And He casts filth to surround those people who don't use their intellect. So in other words, the Almighty is saying that the decision to enable a person to have faith, belief or not is God's decision. And God takes His decision on the basis of whether a person is cleansing himself morally or not. If a person is morally filthy, then that filth is cast upon him, is made to surround him, and it becomes a hurdle, an obstacle for such a person to believe. And this happens when the individual is not using his intellect properly. If a person uses his intellect properly, then he would know that what is good has to be followed, what is evil has to be ignored, and that we always ought to make an earnest attempt to know the truth. But those who are not interested and not using their intellect properly, they are deprived of faith. So, O Prophet, you should not worry about it. It's God's decision. We move on to the next surah, which is the partner surah of Surah Yunus, which is Surah Hud. By the way, both surahs are named after two different prophets, Yunus and Hud alayhimus salam. It starts with this verse, Alif Lam Ra, as indeed has been the case with Surah Yunus, thereby declaring that the two are partners, they form a pair. The first verse says, Kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu summa fussilat. It's a book whose verses were revealed in a brief but comprehensive form. Uhkimat ayatuhu summa fussilat. Then they were explained in detail. Milladun hakimin khabir, from the one who is all wise, all informed. That is, the manner the Almighty has designed His book is such that He has mentioned His verses in a way that they are brief, comprehensive. That's what some verses are. That's what most of the verses that were revealed at the beginning time of the revelation were. And the same principles that are mentioned therein are then expanded, explained in detail. So it's like there are seeds and there are crops, there are plants emerging from the very same seeds. The Quran is absolutely consistent. Sometimes it says what it wants to deliver in the form of basic principles, and on other occasions the same principles are expanded to either be described in details as principles, or the mention of the practical expectations of those principles is to be found in the Quran. This the Almighty has done to make sure that people understand what the Almighty wants to deliver to them, wants them to understand. Because when you have the summary mention, which obviously is good, is effective, but is not enough, because we would not like to know the details. And then the same summary is followed by details, and the two together are consistent, then probably that's the best way of teaching people about a certain subject. And that's what the Quran does. So, for example, we have in the Quran the mention that the Almighty is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim in Surah Al-Fatiha, the first surah of the Quran, immediately followed by the mention that He is Maliki Yawmiddin. So it's a basic principle mention in a very brief manner. The same brief mention is elaborated, explained a little bit more in verse in Surah 6 Al-An'am, verse 12, where the Almighty says, Kataba ala nafsihi rahma. He, God, has written it down, made it binding on Himself that He's going to be merciful. The same thing, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And then instead of Malik Yawmiddin, He says, La yajma'annakum. He is most certainly going to gather you all ila yawmil qiyamah, on the day of judgment, la rayba fi, about which there is no doubt. So what was described in brief in Surah Al-Fatiha was expanded a little bit more in Surah Al-An'am, and there are many other examples in the Quran of similar nature. We move on to verse 17, wherein the Almighty says that, this theme we've already found is repeated over and over again, that it's good humans, good-natured humans who have cared to preserve the goodness of their nature, who believe. The Quran says, أَفَمَنْ كَانَ عَلَى بَيِّنَةٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ وَيَتْلُوهُ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْهُ وَمِنْ قَبْلِهِ كِتَابُ مُوسَى إِمَامًا وَرَحْمَةً أُولَٰئِكَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ. Can a person who is following the clarity of his good nature from his Lord, and then comes an evidence in the form of the Quran from his Lord too, while Moses' book is already there as a guide and mercy, can he disbelieve and reject the Quran? No, he cannot. Such people would certainly believe in it. So, if the message of God is being presented properly, and most certainly when the prophets come, they do it most effectively and convincingly. And there are people out there who are good natured, who have cared to preserve their good nature and are working in the right direction. Then there is no chance that such good people would not believe. And those who are evil would not be able to see the light of the day, because their goodness of nature has already been lost. And God's words do not impress the hearts that have gotten hardened. But obviously this principle cannot be applied in situations where God's message is not being presented properly. Well, in that case, those people who are the custodians of the message should worry about it, as to why is it that on the one hand they have the truth with them. There are many people out there in the society who are good natured, kind, helpful, truth-seeking, truthful. All the good virtues are there, and yet they are not believing. Probably there is something wrong the way the message is being delivered, something wrong with the way we are behaving, and with the way we are preaching, we are proclaiming the message. We then have the story, a heart-rending story of Noah's son, Nuh alayhi salam's son. In verses 45 to 47, the Quran tells us that at the end of the mission, when the message was delivered to his nation, the Almighty, as indeed has always been the case with the stories of messengers, decided that Nuh alayhi salam's, Noah's nation is going to be destroyed by floods, by the natural calamity of floods. So he was asked to make a ship, to make a boat, ark, and there were those very few people, his family members, who went to on board the ship, and they were saved, rescued while there was heavy downpour happening. Water was coming out of the earth as well. And there was this son of Nuh alayhi salam, one of them, one of the four sons. He saw that waves swept him away. At that time, Noah, he called upon his Lord and he said, "O Lord, my son is a part of my family, and your promise is certainly true, and you are the best of the judges." In other words, you promised me that my family is going to be saved, and yet my son, I can see right before my eyes that he is drowning. God responded, "He is not a part of your family. His deeds aren't good. He is not a good person. He is not a part of your family. And don't ask me about what you don't know." Noah, the great servant of God, responded by saying, "I seek refuge in you, O God, if I ask for anything unreasonable. If you won't have mercy on me and won't forgive me, I'll be among the losers." Thereafter, we move on to the story in this surah of another great prophet, Ibrahim alayhi salam. Verses 74 and 75. It tells us that when angels visited Abraham and his family, فَلَمَّا ذَهَبَ عَنْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ الرَّوْعُ وَجَاءَتْهُ الْبُشْرَى يُجَادِلُنَا فِي قَوْمِ لُوطٍ. And when the fright left Abraham Abraham was frightened because he saw angels who apparently looked like humans. And he treated them like humans and wanted to serve them with food. But he could see that they were not interested, even though they didn't belong to the locality where he was living, and therefore must have come from elsewhere, and they should ordinarily be hungry. But they refused to have food. So that frightened Abraham, and the angels then comforted him by telling him that they were angels and they had come to give a good news of a son to him and his wife despite their old age. So he felt comfortable. And then after this fright had gone, disappeared, and he came to learn about the fact that these angels are now going to leave him and visit the nation of Lut alayhi salam, who was his nephew. And that nation is going to be destroyed because of them indulging in evil deeds, as a consequence of which they were rejecting the messenger of God. The Quran says, Abraham began to argue with us concerning the people of Lot, the people of Lut. That is, he started saying to the Almighty, pleading that these people should be spared. Why are you punishing them? And it's mentioned in brief in the Quran, but it's mentioned in greater detail in the Bible that Ibrahim alayhi salam said that, oh God, even if there are going to be 50 good people in that locality, are you still going to destroy them? He said, no, Ibrahim, I will not if there are 50 good people, but there aren't. Then he came down to 45, 40, 35, 30, and he kept on arguing with God until such time that he mentioned 10 or below, and God said that there aren't even 10 people who are good people, good humans, believing. And therefore, the Almighty said to him that, Abraham, just leave it now. You know, we are doing what we know is right. And instead of blaming Ibrahim alayhi salam, Abraham, for arguing with God about what he had already decided, the Almighty says, Inna Ibrahim la halimun awwahum munib. Abraham was forbearing, compassionate, ever inclining towards God, reverting towards him. So he praised him lavishly. Imagine, Abraham is disagreeing with God, so to say, asking him not to punish the nation of Lot. And the Almighty is listening to him patiently. And at the end of this whole, call it debate, when Abraham is finally convinced that these people don't deserve to be spared, the Almighty praises Abraham. In other words, thinking with an open mind, critically thinking, is not what is condemnable. It's not that the Almighty declares independent thinking as undesirable. That's very much what God wants us to do. Because after all, this intellect that we all have is given by God. But He would want us to use our intellect properly, positively, for good purposes. When somebody goes wrong and his mind gets twisted and he starts using his intellect for evil purposes, is stubborn, inflexible, it's only then that the Almighty is displeased and does not approve of what the person is doing. We move on to verses 106 to 108, wherein the Almighty is mentioning a very important policy regarding the punishment of hell. One of the problems which some people have in understanding the message of the Quran is that even though it's understandable that people should be punished for what they have done, for their wrongdoings. However, there is this problem that always is creating difficulty, agitating one's mind, to imagine that the punishment of hell to some individuals is going to be forever, never ever to end. That makes, people a bit too disappointed, and it's something which they can't believe. It's a bit too much for a compassionate God to take that decision. After all, I mean, how wrong could a person go? How evil could a person be? No matter what, the punishment of hell for eternity is something which is difficult to absorb. So here comes the Quran, always clarifying things for our advantage, to our advantage. It says, as for those who were destined to be miserable, they will be in the fire. For them therein will be crying and screaming. They will abide therein forever. Khalidina fiha ma damatis samawatu wal ard. For as long as the heavens and the earth endure. That is, this is God's decision, and God would do as He would choose to. This eternity is not necessarily the kind of eternity that you have in your mind, that it would never ever end. The concept of eternity seems to be that there is a certain maximum time period in the planning of the Almighty for the hell to remain. And there are some people, unfortunate people, who would live in that place of misery for as long as it would last. Others would be removed from there. But it seems from this mention that the Almighty is saying that it's a very likely possibility that God is going to make sure that the hell disappears after a while, or that while could be very long. Obviously, there is no reason why one should feel comfortable about it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not the kind of eternity that we have in mind. Obviously, the next question arises that if that's the case, then how about the eternity of the paradise? And the Quran again responds and says, as far as the paradise is concerned, it's the same description as was done about the hell, that people are going to live there forever, for as long as the heavens and the earth last. But there is this following expression that says, Atan ghaira majzuz. It's an endowment that would never be interrupted. In other words, here is a promise which will never end. So that's an important understanding that we find in the Quran. At the end of this surah, the Almighty is mentioning one clarification which He does over and over and again in the Quran. He says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ. Had it been your Lord's will, لَجَعَلَ النَّاسَ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. He could have made them one religious community. All humans would have belonged to one religion. But He didn't do so. Instead, He gave them freedom, which they exercise. So this life is a trial. Understand this reality. When people are to be tested and tried, they've got to have freedom which they would exercise on their own. They will use whatever freedom they have on their own volition. And as a result, obviously people would disagree with each other and will have different perspectives, views. So this freedom that has been given to humans, they exercise and they are different. So wala yazaluna mukhtalifin, they will continue to disagree with each other, and therefore do not be too concerned and disturbed about it. This is God's design, and through His design, God is ensuring that He distinguishes good people from bad people, and at the end of the day, after this worldly life is over, He will reward those who turned out to be good and would punish those who turned out to be evil. May the Almighty enable us to understand God's message properly, and may He enable us to follow the right path properly and consistently.